Welcome to the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Backus. Today is Halloween, actually, here in the US, October 31st, and I am quite honored to have Daniel Giamario with me today. And welcome, Daniel.
Hey, it's a pleasure seeing you again so soon.
Yeah,
Um, Thanks for inviting me.
yes. And Daniel, well, let me give you a little bit of his bio, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Daniel. Daniel's been an astrologer since the late 60s, and he actually studied with Dane Rudhyar, one of the fathers of modern astrology, is the way I would describe him. And Daniel received a vision for a very unique paradigm in astrology on a vision quest on Mount Shasta in 1981. And he began a couple of different schools that have now morphed into the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. And we'll talk about what that means too, because it's very timely for that discussion. And according to what Daniel says about him, the paradigm includes mythic, psychological, and spiritual elements inspired by many global traditions and uses a three worlds approach, which maybe we'll get into as well. But I think the one of the most important things to talk about with this mystery school and with your approach, Daniel, is this experiential piece of it, and the fact that your astrologers and the people that go through your school have to have some contact and some understanding and some connection with the night sky. And I'll just say briefly before I turn it over to you to kind of add to that is that I just spent a week with you at a hot springs down in southern New Mexico, learning about the cosmology and doing this connection to the night sky. And it was it was magical. And I really am so grateful I got to go. And that was what made me want to come and have you on the podcast and talk about it because it's right in
Mhm.
we're on the same page about really wanting to remember ourselves as nature. So I
Mhm.
wonder, maybe you want to, maybe that has already spurred some things that you'd like to say about this whole approach of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, and then we'll get in deeper to some of the topics.
Yes, as you mentioned, I did start with the Dane Ridjar's approach, and I was actually part of that sort of leading edge of the young astrologers back in the early 70s, which was combining mythic themes, and it was also the time period of trying to see beyond the cultural views of masculine and feminine and things like that. Um, However, it was mainly a left brain approach. But the thing I loved about it more than anything was that it was deviating from the view that many astrologers have that it's about that we're in some kind of deterministic universe, and so that people thinking of astrology as predicting or what's going to cause and effect approach philosophically. And Rajar and in that group of leading edge astrologers at that time period followed the view that the real reason for doing astrology is to connect with our life purpose, like it's an original set of instructions that we get from the chart. And then a person can have the freedom to align with that or not. So the purpose of an astrologer was to help a person get in touch with their life purpose, right? But then what happened is that I sort of went through a kind of a spiritual crisis regarding the path I had been on. And so that in 1981, through the agency of the Ojai Foundation and Joan Halifax, I went on this Vision Quest experience to Mount Shasta. And it was there that I had this remarkable breakthrough experience where I felt like the land and the sky really connected with me, met me, uh, uh, I did not feel isolated anymore, like in my brain or whatever. And I made a commitment at that point is if I'm going to continue to be an astrologer, it must be within the framework of land and sky. So therefore, for the next 10 years, I actually just experimented with taking people out to sacred sites and putting them on the ground, getting them away from city lights, and experimenting with different astrological techniques with people out under the sky. And that's how the first school I had formed. And then it was in the shamanic astrology mystery school that we started my books came out, my first book came out, and we started a certification program, and that lasted for quite a long time. And but then in 2022, for a large number of reasons, then we just transformed it into the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. And before 2020, we used to do 5 or 6 in-person events a year. It
Mm.
was all based upon in-person. And now, but we did actually, before knowing anything about what actually did happen in 2020, we did have the intelligence to put our courses online. So we have online courses, and as much as possible, try to get people together in person, because I believe it's the real magic happens when people are together with each other, heart to heart, and soul to soul. And so I've had a number of different great adventures in addition to Faywood Hot Springs, where you were last month, including going out to some of my favorite spots that really sourced the visions of what our school has been. Petroglyph sites that I found on my own personal investigations, and also then beginning an apprenticeship program, be able to pass the information, the knowledge and experience of those places to those that have been in the school for a while. Because who knows? I mean, I'm approaching I'm approaching 80 years old, so who knows how much longer I'll be around doing what I'm doing, but I'm committed to doing it as long as possible.
I have to say I mean, one of the most remarkable things just being in that week at Faywood was that connection to the not just the people, but the land itself. And in fact, one of the questions I had for you is that I've written a little bit about, being there. That's where you created a stone circle 20 years ago, I think, 2 decades ago, right? And
Yeah, at the last stone, the December solstice stone went in 2004 or something like that, right? And
yeah,
then we put in 4 more stones
yep.
last month. Yeah.
Yeah, for the lunar standstill, that was fun, but we maybe we'll come back to that too. But what I wanted to ask you is that I've had a couple of people ask me, well, what was such a big deal about standing in a stone circle and looking at the sky and the stars, and I had a hard time explaining it to them, and I'm thinking that you might do a better job than I can. What's so powerful about having those stones on the ground when you're looking at the sky like that?
Well, on one hand, it allows you to see how your individual chart, how it lines up with the sky. So it's like putting your chart on the ground. It also gives you the experience of seeing how planets, sun, and moon, where they rise, where they set. But I think that within this teaching, within our school, that it gives you the opportunity to actually receive the guidance and the transmissions directly from the uh, starry patterns, the movement of the planets, the relationship between the planets moving through, which star groups they're moving through. So it gives you a living experience of the whole thing. And I mean, quite frankly, that's how human beings related to the land and sky for hundreds of thousands of years. Before the onset of the Kali Yuga, and the more of a separation effect happened into materialism and into the focus on the on left brain intelligence and separation from our Earth Mother.
Yeah, yeah, I love what you say about receiving the transmissions directly because For me, I think the most powerful moments were watching the sun rise and then watching the sun set. It was like, I don't know, there was something very visceral about watching the sun go down over the horizon.
I thought of just an example right now. Actually, it was the very first thing that keyed me in, even before I went on the Vision Quest experience. It was in about the mid 70s, or probably 1976. I just returned from Thailand, where I had been teaching meditation over there. And I went on my first camping trip, actually, with my brother. And we went up to this campsite that was north of Los Angeles and somewhere near Ojai in that area. And it was a full moon. It just happened to be a full moon night. And my brother just wanted to camp under this sheltered tree area, but I felt I wanted to go up on the ridge and see the sky. And so on that evening, I saw the moon rise as the sun set. And what happened to me was in my mind, because I was already, of course, doing astrology at that point, it said, oh, now I know what an opposition is.
Yeah.
I felt it in my body what that resonant polarity was between the moon and the sun, so it was a direct experience of the meaning of that aspect.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. That's a beautiful example. Yeah. So one of the things, well, okay, there's a couple of other words that I pulled out when I was both from listening to you and then reading it. And one of the other things was you talked about participating and making this a participatory
Mhm.
study. And I think that you just gave a great example of that. And then maybe you've got more that you'd want to say, because you've also talked about the Neolithic people and how people have done this for, well, at least pre-modern times. So I wonder if there's more you'd want to say about the participatory aspect of this form of
Sure.
astrology.
Yes. Well, one thing that is part of the cosmology training is that recognition that individual horoscopes did not even exist until about 500 BC. Before that, the way that tribes, clans, areas of where people are living in a certain area for many generations, they participated with it by devising their ceremonies directly from the motion and the movement of the planets. Which is one reason why we place in our school so much emphasis on the so-called synodic cycles. But from a visual perspective, kind of watching how Venus and Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, how they move with each other, and then you can create stories. You can project stories onto those motions. Much of this idea came from that very important book that was written in 1969 called Hamlet's Mill, which is describing from the view of Herta von Deschend the real brilliance behind that work, that the ancients, not through linear science, but through myth and story, were very, very aware of the precession, for example. But of course, they're describing it in a different way than the alleged discovery of precession by Hipparchus. So this had been known for a very long period of time. So the idea here is that participatory ceremonies, and this was Herta van Deschen's view, they can only survive for long periods of time if they really are connected to the reality of the structure of the movements of the heavens. So that's a direct expression of as above, so below. And in fact, I'll take it even further, and say that the patterning that we see with our senses in the sky is directly related to the patterning of our own psyche.
Yeah. Yeah, and what one of the things you said, I try not to be, well, I try not to be judgmental and critical of other ways of doing ceremony, but one of the things I've noticed is that there's more emphasis now on calendar dates, for instance, August 8th, 11/11, those kinds of things. And
Mhm.
I have such a hard time tapping into feeling them. And I think what you just said, and I know you've written about this as well, is that it's missing that embodied,
Mhm.
to use an overused word, that embodied sense of there's a planet actually moving, or there's the sun and the moon in relationship.
The secular calendar is only very minorly related to the actual way that the planets and the Earth and the sun and the moon are related to each other. However, those relationships, the real relationships, are built into the metrology, the way in which ancient stone circles were built. So that we so that the this like the metric system or the way that calendar is set up, with the way the secular calendar is, that's really mainly political. It's not really related to the actual motions.
Right,
That does tend to keep people separated from really being connected to earth and sky in a participatory way. Mhm.
right. So, that made me think of something else, but I think I might have lost it for the moment. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and then maybe I'll remember what I was thinking about and come back to it. But one of the things, oh, actually, before I go there, I did remember it. One of the things that you've said, and this is something that's kind of dear to my heart too, is that we have this conditioning right now that we're the most advanced civilization ever, right? And we have more technology, and we have that our science is more advanced. And I think that's one of the things you're referencing with Hamlet's Mill, which I have not read, but that's
Mhm.
also one of the things that you talk about in the school. And I think there was even a little bit of proving of that. Well, proving of that with the stone circle that you built, that it wasn't with the use of a lot of instruments and modern
Yeah.
technology, for instance.
Uh, I've written extensively about this topic, that the whole idea of linear progress is an idea that only came at the beginning of the Kali Yuga. That's only that whole linear progress idea is a symptom of the descent, actually, the devolution. And so actually that's a whole topic that's worthy of a whole other conversation. But for much longer time periods in history, humanity understood cycles. It was cycles, not anything like linear progress. We're living in a very interesting time in that if you follow the research and the discoveries, and particularly non-mainstream versions of research and discovery, we're becoming more and more aware that there are many other kinds of quote technologies. And also, if one uses so the view of the mystery school teachings of people like Rudolf Steiner, that the understanding there is that in different time periods in history there was a different density. So therefore the laws of physics would be different now than it would have been, say, in the Sat Yuga, or in the different other ages. So basically the density is at its greatest density right now. So therefore you have to use metal, uh, fuel burning rockets, to leave the atmosphere, while there's other ways that could have been done, and in the alternative communities of looking at other forms of technologies that have existed, that one can see other ways to build a quote civilization.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of the work of an author named David Graeber, who one of the most remarkable books anybody could ever read regarding a different view of who, who human beings have been is a book called The Dawn of Everything, which
Mm.
it completely explodes and renders um, what completely deficient the people like Yuval Harari and these individuals that think that we are in an advanced technological age, when in fact it's an example of the deepest descent into materialism, and that far further back there are so many ways that uh, that communities organize themselves. And another idea in his work is the fact that global states are not inevitable. They're a choice. So there's a view, because there's he gives so many examples back 10,000 years of where people have made different choices, particularly the way the Native Americans organized their culture before the Europeans arrived.
Yeah, that is a good example. Well, and I think this leads in really well to the whole discussion of the turning of the ages, because one
Sure.
of the things, I mean, I think a lot of us sense it, a lot of people are talking about it, is that things are moving faster. It does feel like things are becoming less dense and that there's more awareness of different, most people call it dimensions. I guess it depends on what word works for you, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the turning of the ages, because I've been calling it the time of transition and focusing in on this 6 or 7 year period that we're in right now since 2020. But I think you have a much bigger view of it, and I'd love to hear some more about that.
Well, one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm not saying it's in all schools of astrology or among all astrologers, but there's the great majority of what I see out there. They may be very good at like mentioning, gee, 2025 had four outer planets moving into new signs. This is revolutionary, incredible. The large number of discussions about, what age are we in? Lots of different versions of that. We have our own. But what I fail to see that often is the larger context. And that is something that if just a few of us back in the 1980s, actually, the very first reference to what I'm going to refer to now was in Hamlet's Mill, which was the fact that it was in 1969. So these ideas weren't even out there until 1969, which is that there's a point, and you were in the classes, so you remember when I was talking about this, that the so-called galactic alignment. There's different names. We don't use that expression. We use more the turning of the ages idea, but which is how can you tell what time is it really in all of these different cosmological cycles, and so we always start with what we can see with our senses.
Mhm.
And so there is a way in which you can calibrate the cosmic clock and understand what time it is in the larger, and I'm speaking now of the astrological ages, which is when the solstices or the equinoxes align with the two crosses in the sky. The two places in the sky where the plane of the solar system and the plane of the galaxy intersect. And those intersection points are like that for hundreds of thousands of years. So it has been the the face of the clock, that from which you can figure out like when ages end and begin. And our own view in the school is that if you use the 360 degree of a circle, and then you have 1 degree every 71.5 years, usually rounded off to one every 72 years, 1 degree, that we use that to determine the time frame of a great turning. And there's different ways of determining whether it is a great turning and not just a seasonal shift, right? And so that would be the time period 1962 to 2034. And why those dates? Because we have been able to determine, and it's through the help of an astronomer who's now in his 90s, who calculated what was the exact point when the solstice, zero Capricorn, was exactly at the cross. And that happened to be 1998. So we placed 36 years on either side of 1998. And that becomes the zone of the great turning.
Can,
Now, yes.
can you just explain the cross a little bit more? Because I think that that's not immediately obvious. I think of it as galactic center, what's known as galactic center, but I don't know if that's the right way to think about it.
Well, it's actually, if you look at the constellational groups, there's two places in the sky where the Milky Way crosses the plane of the solar system. One is in between the Scorpion and the Archer. So you have the constellation of the Scorpion, you have the constellation of the Archer, and the
Right.
cross there, and that's galactic center. That's looking toward the center of our galaxy. And then the opposite side of the sky is in between the Bull constellation and the Twins constellation. And that's a circle of stars, and it's kind of like a cross in the middle of the circle. And that's where the Milky Way comes through. But that's what we call the galactic edge. So that's the band of the way people say the Milky Way, the band of the Milky Way. That's a tricky expression because the whole galaxy is called the Milky Way. But then people say that, okay, that string of stars is also the Milky Way. Well, it's less dense, it's less bright at the galactic edge because that's looking out into deep space, because our solar system is on the edge of the galaxy. Well, it's really thick bands toward the center, which is why the galactic center area is a much more prominent, particularly in our day when you have to actually go into a very dark sky area to really clearly perceive the Milky Way when it's coming through the hoop and coming through the galactic edge area. So those are the two places in the sky which are the crosses. And so then when solstices line up, or equinoxes, so the equinoxes would have lined up with these crosses one season ago, about over 6,000 years ago, 1/4 of the precessional cycle. And those are the turning points in the season. So if we think of the 26,000-year cycle as a great year, then the great year has 4 seasons in it. And you can actually see by this face of the clock, which are the cosmic crosses, you can actually see when the seasonal shift happens. And then and as the tendency has been since recent research says, since it started in China, actually, before it reached Samaria in India, which is then the division of the circle by 12.
Right.
So that you have the 4 points, and then you make 12 from it, and then so you have the 12 months of the great year.
And that's what we call the age of Pisces, age of Aquarius, age of whatever.
Except it's about the constellation, not the sign, and that's you can really see why there's the necessity, in my view, of knowing something about the sky, because people make the mistake of projecting what they think to be true about the sign of Aquarius, and so when the March equinox moves into the water bearer, that's a constellation, not a sign. And
Right.
that there's a different meaning to those things.
Well, if we follow in that thread of meaning now and put it and talk again about this great turning,
Yes.
one of the things you've mentioned, the Kali Yuga, I think you've talked about the Mayan calendar, and I know I've pulled some of this together from your work and other places too. It's like all of these ancient time telling techniques seem to say we're in a big shift, right?
Yeah.
So what
It's
is
all converging now. Yeah.
and so what is that for you, thinking about all of this, what does that mean for us? Where are we going? I mean, to me, it sounds like we're coming out of some of the darkness and maybe looking forward to a little bit more wisdom and awareness. But I'm curious, what do you say about all that? We know we're in a
Well, you
big
see, if we go back to the 1980s or 90s, and we were trying to speculate on how do you determine whether it's the end and the beginning of the entire 26,000 year cycle, there was definitely reason to debate the issue. I mean, because there's the view that uh, some people who are into the Egyptian mythology, they say, well, it all started 12,000 years ago or 13,000 years ago, so-called Zep-Tepi. But I believe it's this research that happened from Bibhu Dev Mishra, who wrote the book that I think was the most important book of 2024 called Yuga Shift. And
mm,
and it's what I had suspected for a long time, and his book very much solidifies that the view I'm going to present here, which is that you can make a correlation between the real understanding of the yuga cycles with the precessional cycle, that you can match them up. And so it turns out that where we are right now is at the very end of the Kali Yuga, the densest age, the Iron Age. And so it's when you reach the bottom of the Iron Age, then what happens is that the age of materialism, one way or another, must be composted using my Plutonian language, so that it can't go any denser. So yes, there's then a slow movement back to Kali Yuga. But the thing about how that happens is that it is actually then the spiritual will of an awake human to perceive the density and choose something different rather than to be consumed by it. Like you become part of the machine, you become part of the Borg, as it were. And so that's why there is an awakening, but it's the awakening by virtue of the spiritual will perceiving the density and the darkness. But one way or another, and these mythic stories are all over the planet, that when the earth herself cannot be healthy, then there is a deal made between Shiva and Shakti to have it be uh, consumed, to bring it to a resurrection point, to have it be reborn in a way that actually emphasizes the spirit and the soul and the heart of real humans.
so how do you like what are you seeing with your clients? What are you telling your clients? Like how do we take something that big and then put it into our own lives and into our own astrology practice, for instance?
I'm always reminded of this comment that Rijar, one of my favorite quotes from him, he says that if a person does not fulfill their dharma, there's a hole in the universe left where they were intended to be. So that's just sort of a way into answering your question. Um, the view that we would hold is that if you really are in alignment with your life purpose, then it really doesn't matter on the outside what happens.
Right.
Uh, so, I mean, the very practical examples I can give you. There are plenty of people who, perceiving the great poisoning that is happening on the planet, that they might say, why would we bring children into the world now? However, if a man or a woman's dharma is to have children, well, then they have children. If you're a gardener, you garden. I mean, you fulfill your dharma regardless of what. It's like that famous story where I think it was Saint Francis is out hoeing his garden and is asked, "What would you do if you were going to be killed at dawn? I'm sorry, at sunset." he said I would keep hoeing my garden. So that basically we do what our dharma is, but that's not always a path of least resistance.
Right.
So I sometimes, in a more generalized way, try to share this in the following way. In the Christian Bible, there's that statement, many are called and few are chosen, but I've rewritten that within the context of your question to say, many are called, but only some agree. So human beings have the freedom to not be what they were intended to be.
Well, and so one of the things that one of the trends that I see in the astrology and that hear a few other people talking about is that we're entering a period where sovereignty is even
Right,
more important.
right.
Yeah, so that sounds like that's right up your alley too. Can you talk about that?
Well, this goes right into the discussion about what I call the shadow of Aquarius. Now, see, I come from I'm a late '60s guy, right? Pluto and Leo, and back then was a previous time period, which is where there's a lot of glamour around the age of Aquarius. Okay, actually, in doing deep studies into that subject, I saw a whole library once of books written in the 1920s that were talking about the beginning of the age of Aquarius. There was a view about that in the late 1890s about what the beginning of the age of Aquarius. And so I actually have a podcast out there on our YouTube channel called "Oh, it's the age of Aquarius again." But the issue here is that for us in the late '60s, we were Pluto and Leo generation, and in order and our remember the example I gave about seeing what the full moon coming up and the sun setting, and so, oh, that's an opposition. Well, we don't even like to use the word opposition in the school because it sounds like two things opposed to against each other.
Right.
So I look at it as a resonant polarity. So an example is that we have a Taurus full moon coming up, but it's really Taurus Scorpio. You don't want to leave the sun out of it. It's really the resonant polarity between those two. So when the emphasis is placed on Aquarius without Leo, then you get collectivism. Then you get different versions of collectivism, which then becomes the mob. It's the shadow of democracy, actually. Well, if you remember, but the too much Leo is then the shadow of my own generation, which is called the me generation. So you can go into either extreme, but you have to have both of them together. Every spiritual teacher that has made any difference in my life, that I really respect their teachings, always say that evolution only happens through the individual, not the collective.
Yeah.
So that goes back to I write pretty much everything I ever write. I say that's really about developing our sovereign self. This is very different than a selfish ego. It's like knowing who you are. I can remember uh, probably the most important book that got me on my path was this experience I had when I was in college. This is even before I got into astrology. And this guy walks up to me and says, "I know you're probably going to have an opportunity soon to do some psychedelic drugs, all right?" And he hands me this book and said, "Would you please read this book first?" Which I did, and it was a book by Alan Watts that was called "The Book," subtitle "On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are."
Oh, good one. Okay.
Yeah. And so that actually was establishing just some examples of what you're talking about. It's knowing our life purpose, knowing who we really are. Because there has been in the age of materialism an attempt to make it seem like consciousness just comes from the brain. That the elimination of spirit and soul. It was back in the 1920s that they kind of wrote ether out of it. You know, that
Right.
they're, and now that's all coming back in, and more of the alternative scientists, about plasma.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's almost, I mean, in some ways, it's as if science, modern quote unquote, science is starting to slowly catch up.
Right. I'll give you. It's really interesting. It seems that the majority of human beings today are ahead of the curve compared to what the mainstream would say.
Yeah.
I'll give you. I'll give you an example. Uh, there still is the leading edge in universities with philosophy and psychology is behaviorism. And which is like you're born as a blank slate. Well, I probably since the late 60s probably ended up seeing 20,000 charts, and I don't know how many. I mean, just even if I include mini readings and so on, I've shared astrology with a large number of people, and I always say at the beginning, there's a portion of the chart that will describe your lineage, what you came in with. You're not a blank slate. And any parent that has more than one child knows that no matter what you try to do to them, they have a certain essence that is different than what you tried to make them be or what the culture makes them be. And I've always said this: you're not a blank slate. I've not ever had one person not agree with that.
Right. Right.
So there is an original essence of a human being coming in before their culture does anything to them, and I think that's really an important factor because if we don't have the principle of sovereignty of the individual, the integrity and the divinity of being a spark of God, then it's very easy to get sucked into the collective.
Yeah.
And then that's leaving the Leo portion out of it. And then it becomes the shadow of Aquarius, which is what Pluto in Aquarius really symbolizes. And when Pluto went direct a few weeks ago, I can't remember the date right now, I wrote something up about it. It's not going to retrograde back into Capricorn. It's now fully into Capricorn until 24, into Aquarius until 2043. And so therefore we're fully into this is the shadow of the sign of Aquarius. It has very little to do with the Aquarian age. And what would be the shadow of Aquarius? It's actually the materialism of consciousness. I mean, making everything into digital, making everything into the simulacra of the real thing. The attempt to create a digital twin, turning everything into tokens. I mean, this is the deepest descent into materialism that the humans have ever come up with. And any sovereign human being is not going to want to go in that direction because then that becomes the collective Borg, the a technological world brain, which is a facsimile, actually not a facsimile, a simulacra of the real thing.
Yeah, and I think that, before we started, you and I talked about another shadow, and that was AI, which of course plays in what you're talking about. And to me, it's like a unidimensional look at life, right? That there's just one dimension, which I maybe is synonymous with materialism, instead of understanding that we are multidimensional beings, including that spiritual, etc. So I mean, what's the advice that you give people? That's the fulfill your dharma. What else? I mean, what else would you say about this? Like, where the lunar nodes are going to shift into lead.
Well, back to AI for a moment. So when I was teaching in Sedona, I was the keynote speaker, but there at a conference in Sedona at the beginning portion of my trip to the U.S. last month, and uh, I had an opportunity to take the people there. It's about 100 people there out under the night sky 2 nights in a row. And while we were given as part of our contract to be a speaker there, not to veer off into politics.
Mhm.
Um, some of the speakers there did do that. So anyway, on the final night that I was there, at the very end of my presentation, I said, I'd like to talk to you all about a topic that I think we need to talk about. And it was riveting to this group. We didn't want to close the evening outside under the sky because it was so important to everyone, and it is to me too, which is the impact of AI on human-centered astrology. So right now, if you have your AI coach, and you say, "Hey, what's my Saturn return mean?" And so people are turning to apps and they're turning to chat and Grok or whatever in order to get their astrology reading. This is a huge danger to what I like to think of as what really astrology is, which is a soul to soul, person to person experience.
Yeah.
That then it turns it into you're essentially giving your soul away when you do that. Because if you're really doing an authentic reading for someone, it's a magical experience. Particularly if the other person you're sharing with is open to share, their reality. Then it becomes a soul to soul, heart to heart encounter. That's not going to happen with your AI guide who's just mirroring what you want to hear.
Well, and who's really just, a voice from your device. Yeah.
Which is a part of this is what I think a lot of people don't understand is that the large language models are not just the next step of a calculator. It's something different. So, like for example, in our school, we're not Luddites. It's a neo-Luddite school, but I will give you an example. When I was learning the night sky back in the 80s, I would have it over here somewhere. I would just have this cardboard thing where I would look up at the sky, and I would, okay, I'm learning that part of the sky. Well, all right, let me check. Well, I think you can do that with an app, which is fine. I mean, an app is just a more developed version of that cardboard thing I was looking at. However, people look at this first now rather than up there. So what I'm suggesting is that if you want to use technology, that's fine, but have an apprenticeship with nature first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I go back so far that up until 1978, I hand calculated all my charts. Now I'm very happy to have a computer program in order to do it for me. That's a tool. But if you turn over the interpretation
Right.
to a large language model, then you're essentially lessening your capacity to have your own cognitions.
Right. And I agree with you. I mean, it's one of the reasons I like to have live readings is it's the conversation and the connection that it's not just me, it's that combination of us that brings the chart to life.
Indeed, and that's actually the primary thesis of one of my favorite books, even though it's an entirely different paradigm of astrology, but it's making the point that we're making here. It's Jeffrey Cornelius's book, the Moment of Astrology, which is just describing that. I think that's the name of it. That actually every reading is a divination. That it's happening in that present moment, and it can only happen that way in that moment.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have the experience too that the moment the person schedules the reading for, there's something going on at that moment with the moon or something that draws your attention and that sort of leads you in.
There's generally a very specific significator that, why are they there at that session at that time period?
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't know, but in a in a conversation and a connection, it reveals itself.
There's so many more things that I kind of I'm still or in my mind about what we could talk about. We're getting a little bit close to the end, but I wanted to kind of go back to that the idea of the chart showing, I think in the way you've written it up online, it says a blueprint of your original intent. And maybe you could just
Yeah,
talk.
I wouldn't. I would say the original set of instructions.
Okay.
Yeah, and so there's a way of looking at the chart where you can, get the story of who you had been before. What are the set of so what you're bringing up is something that I think is very important to get into this conversation. One of the differences between our approach and a lot of other astrology is that if you look at a chart, the way that many other astrologers look at a chart, they're trying to match it to how you are.
Hmm.
Well, our view is that it's a set of instructions that's about intent.
Yeah.
And so most of the, like, for example, you remember what happened in Faywood? It's like there's about 19 women there,
Hmm.
and not one of the women there had Venus in the same sign as the sun sign. Not one. Even though the statistics are about 2 out of 5 will have Venus in the same sign as the sun. Now, so therefore, just as a simple example, the Venus position on a woman's chart is the intent. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that individual has an easy time with it. It's what they're learning about, some more than others. And then it depends on, their family, their culture, the aspects on the chart, what cycle they're in, and everything else. But that's why we place much more attention on the Venus and Mars positions and the rising sign in our school than the regular old sun sign categories.
Yeah. 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 I think that could be a whole conversation that, well, I think the sacred marriage could be a whole conversation and that whole thing about intent because you're right. I mean, I think a lot of people go to astrology, especially when you're talking about the stuff online, to say, well, who am I? What am I? Instead of what did
Oh,
I?
you're Capricorn, therefore blah blah blah. When of course you have a lot of things in Capricorn, so there would be a little bit more match there. But then you also have the Venus Jupiter conjunct in Sagittarius, and that to me is the more important ingredient on the chart for what version of the sacred feminine you came in to be.
Well, and as soon as you started talking about it, I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the Venus in Sagittarius is very different than all that Capricorn energy. Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't say the Capricornian elements on your chart are unimportant. I'm just indicating
Right.
the leading edge,
Right.
the one you came in to differentiate as from the sun sign.
Well, and that, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense just from my life too and how I operate and want to operate. Well, okay, so is there anything else, any other topic that we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on before we kind of go to announcements and close?
Well, just maybe when every people always say, what can we do about this, or what is the navigation, and that's where we have in our school the so-called three worlds approach.
Yeah.
So therefore our hope is, what we're hoping people can do is to recognize that all three are real and are important to recognize. There are some people who are going to split off into the celestial. There's some people who are just stuck in the underworld, and then there's some people who are just totally engaged just with their uh, material life, you know. And so the idea is to know that all three are happening at the same time. So basically, we allocate the main planetary elements into the three worlds. It comes from Shamanism 101. So Uranus and Neptune are upper world or celestial world. The nodes, Jupiter and Saturn, are middle world. And then Pluto, and at least certainly at this time period, it'll be remain to see how it develops over the next 100 years. We allocate Chiron and Pluto to the underworld,
And
and each of them has their own form of engagement.
can you give a like a an example of what that looks like in somebody's life? Like if you're, how would you look at something from underworld, upper world, middle world? Because I think that's a great model, and I've thought about it many times.
Well, I mean, if a person is operating or is able to recognize the importance of the upper world, well, then from the perspective of the upper world, the universe is unfolding as it should, all is well.
Yeah. Yeah.
From the perspective of the underworld, annihilation can happen at any instant. So both of them require certain kinds of surrender. So one of them is a surrender to the providence and the mercy of that one woman, Holy Mother, and then the underworld. It's that basically there's our this is just a suit, that we can this who we really are is not our attachment to our life, and then the middle world is man, that's that could, there's like a million things we can talk about there. I mean, if you happen to be in a bad, challenging, or if you happen to have a more sardonic nature, then you can say, here's the thousand ways the world is messed up. Well,
Right.
then if you have a more optimistic approach, here's the thousand ways we can make the world work for everybody. I mean, a really great example of a middle world prophet was, say, Buckminster Fuller,
Yes.
triple cancer, who we can make the world work for everyone, So there's the middle world has a large range, but the problem with that is that if a person is only stuck in the middle world, then they're just living in a cause and effect machine. They're not recognizing that there is a spiritual dimension, and they're not recognizing that there's transitoriness, and that at various points in the natural process, things will die.
That's a
You know.
perfect example. And I
Mhm.
think, especially right now, I think we can certainly see all of those
Yes.
in full force.
And then, when you're working with a client, it's there's time periods where a person is primarily just in one of the three. And so usually then the purpose of the session is to say, okay, you're in this now, you have to navigate this. But there's also there's other cycles, other dimensions, and remember that all three are really happening at the same time.
Right. Right. And the depending on what life stage and the set of
Right.
transits we're in, different ones will be triggered.
A good example, I'm always having this conversation in our family here, is that the average person, when they're loaded with Saturn cycles, they're feeling, when if I just when will this be over? Instead of saying the purpose of being in it is to do some deep work. I mean, you're not just the point is not just to gut through it, because it'll just come back at a more dense level next time if you don't work through the stuff you have an opportunity to work through now.
Yeah, that's the blessing of astrology is it lets you know what time it is in your life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, okay, so let's wrap for now, and then I think we might have to do this again and pick a topic to dive deeply into. It could be fun.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, I love doing this, so invite me anytime you'd like. Mm.
Yeah, okay. Because I do want to have time to, you have a couple of things going on. So I know one of the ways to connect with your school is to become a member, and you have a couple of different levels, and there's some really great benefits to the membership. So we'll put that link in the show notes. But I think you
Mhm.
have a couple of other things coming up, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about those.
Okay. Well, just in a few days, or rather on United States Monday, we have our school is divided into four branches, and we have these free sort of fireside chat kind of things online, um, where we talk about the different branches. So we do it around the time period of the cross quarters. And so we're in a Samhain cross quarter at this in these next over this next week, and so it'll be a chance to talk about what we call our water branch, which has to do with the applications of this approach to astrology to the healing professions. So it has we have a lot of people in our school that are coaches, counselors, therapists, and so on that are not necessarily practicing astrologers, but they can use these techniques to make their practice more powerful. Right. So that's we have an open discussion about that, and then we always have seminars at the solstice points. And so what'll happen the 20th and 21st of December is one of them is looking ahead at 2026. So it's like what are the main cycles of next year? And then last is that one of the big events we have in person next year, although we will be doing another Faywood event in September next year, is that we have a big feature of our school is eclipses, working with eclipses. And so there is an eclipse moving through Western Spain. And so we're going to be doing one of our course threes there around the time of the eclipse. So we'll have a whole day to work with the eclipse. And then it'll be one of our relationship and sacred marriage courses. That's happening in August of next year. And
Okay.
all that information that I'm just sharing with you, it can be found on the calendar page of our website, turningoftheages.com.
Okay. And I'll put direct links into all of those. Is the Faywood event up there as well?
Not
Oh,
yet. Not
okay.
yet. We
I meant to ask you about that. I'm very excited to know you're doing it because I will probably be there.
Yeah, what we decided is that because of how more difficult it is these days to have in-person events, and particularly with me being in Asia, um, we're combining course 4 and 5, the synodic cycles and the cosmology, for one in-person event. But for those that are in our certification program, they have to do the online version and then just come to that one event rather than coming to two different events. So it'll be another one of these combination events of going into the synodic cycles and then also the obviously the night sky at the stone circle.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely put all of that in the notes because I encourage anybody who wants that experience, especially if you're in the US. It's just I think it's amazing to have that kind of structure
Mhm.
out there that we have access to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
uh,
it's one of my most magical things of my life was being able to have that there.
yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, it was a magical event and it does have it's a place that you can feel it.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Without question.
go ahead. What were you saying?
I said I agree, without
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Mhm.
I did want to mention I have a couple of events coming up a week from Saturday, November 8th. I'll be doing just a quick look at 2026 and some of the big sort of
Mhm.
astrology shifts then. And then I'm going to be doing a solstice retreat and I'll be doing a little bit, just a smidge of the connection to the night sky at the solstice. It's at a hot springs here in New Mexico up near Santa Fe.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'll be talking more about that, maybe not so much on the podcast, but it'll be on my website. So yeah, and the, yeah, in terms of connecting with the sky, the solstice is such a wonderful time to do it for a lot of reasons. All of the cross quarters, but maybe it's the Capricorn in me. The solstice is sort of near and dear to my heart.
Well, it's, you know, as you know, I'm a Capricorn moon, almost exactly the same degree as your sun sign.
Yeah.
And it was always in our school, and in my own experience, it's the December solstice that most calls to me. And that was the last stone that got put in, you know, at the stone circle, you know. So that's my favorite junction point of the year. Mm,
Yeah, it's I mean, I even before I understood astrology, it was I just would look forward to that time of year and the turning point of the sun.
totally.
Well, this has been delightful. I mean, gosh, we've covered a lot of ground too. I took pages of notes and I will try to do it justice in the description. But thank you so much for joining me, Daniel.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. I'm great collaborating with you on this call. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and especially coming all the way from the Philippines. Of course, it doesn't feel like you're that far away, but that's always amazes me that we can do this. And thank you everybody who's listening. I know that you're not listening at this moment, but you're certainly catching our energy, I think. And the date that I want to just mention that the first event that Daniel mentioned, the free call is Monday, November 3rd. So if you're interested, kind of need to get on it as soon as you hear this podcast.
And that's at 5 p.m. Pacific,
Pacific. Okay.
Pacific Standard Time.
Right. That's right. Because time changes this weekend. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you again, Daniel, and thank you all for listening. And we'll talk to you next time.
Excellent. All right. Bye.